Okay, just a quick feedback. The slides are visible, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
It's
great.
quite visible. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, and thanks to Professor Tahir and to the rest of the organizers for inviting me for sharing some thoughts on this topic, formulating interesting research questions. So I'm glad I could virtually meet all of you. I can see a lot of faces there virtually. So I have a presentation, and I think I have what 2 hours, Tahir, for this. So I have 2 hours for this.
Yes,
So there'll be a break in
yes, sir.
between after
Yes,
one
sir.
hour. Okay, so I will try and maybe stick my presentation to 1.5 hours, and then in the second part of the remaining part of the session, we can take questions, right? So does that sound fine? Okay. So what I'll do is in the initial part of the session, I will try and share some of the thoughts that I have on, as researchers, and all of you are researchers. Many of you have been told are doing your PhD program. So which is a great way to start your research. So I would be sharing some of my experiences and thoughts on how, as researchers, we can, kind of start off the research, any research, whether it's your thesis or any paper that you're writing, and and the first starting point of a good research is always research questions. So therefore, I thought that I'll share some thoughts about how we as researchers can formulate and develop interesting research questions. And obviously, there is no rule, there is no formula, and there is no structured way, or there is no one way of doing all this. So it comes with experience. It comes with some skills also. So with that, I think we'll all will improve over time. But as many of you have already begun, and some of you are beginning to on the research journey, it would be good to also hear from your side, what kind of challenges you are facing in formulating good questions. Or if you have not started yet, then if you have any thoughts or any questions about how you can start off your research journey by asking interesting research questions. Okay. So what I'll do is it's a free flowing kind of a presentation from my side. Feel free to stop me if you have any questions on anything that you want to ask questions on. So I don't mind that. So you don't have to wait till the end of the presentation to ask me questions. So you can stop me anytime if you have anything to ask. Okay. So I have no issues with that. So let me start off. So the first thing I just wanted to tell all of you is that as I've already told you, and I wanted to repeat that, is that a starting point of any research, whether it is your thesis research or it's your paper or any research that you start off, don't start off until your research questions are final from your side. So I would say that the importance of research question is extremely high because, as I told you, that the starting of any research is a research question, and typically one research article should have maybe two or 2.5 or 3 research questions, but typically 2 research questions are good enough for starting a good research paper or a good research study. And those of you who are doing dissertation or thesis would typically be told by your thesis advisors that you should have 3 to 4 research questions. The scope of the work in thesis would be much more than what the quantity of work that you do in a paper. So this will also depend, therefore, how do you treat your research question. In cases, your advisory committee would tell you to kind of do more work in your between those 3 research questions, and in a paper you would probably be doing lesser than what you do in a thesis. So there is no defined way of kind of coming to any conclusion regarding how much depth and how much width you would need to take for any research question that you ask. But we'll come to that. But fundamentally, what we are saying are the following points. The number one point is that always start your research with research questions. And as I told you that if you have a thesis, you should have 3 to 4 research questions. And these research questions should not be all spread out. They should not be all unrelated. They should be interrelated set of questions. Collectively, they should be able to define what exactly you are trying to do in your thesis. And similarly, in your research paper, if you are starting off your research study or research paper, always start off with an interesting set of one or two, or at least two, I would say, not more, not less, two interrelated set of questions, research questions that would, when you try and do research on those questions, that will define the scope of work that you do in your paper that finally you want to publish, right? So that's my first thought, that research question should always be a starting point for writing a good research article, or in general doing any research study. So my second point is about theoretical contribution. So as you know that most of us that means as research scholars, whether we are faculty or we are PhD students or we are postdoctoral students, most of us who are in the research in some part of our research journeys, we are kind of measured by the publications that we have, and always as you become faculty, you realize that your promotion and your tenure and other things are related, and your stature and respect is also directly correlated with the quality and more important than quantity, the quality of research articles that you publish. So if research article is the currency through which you are measured, and across the world, this is what is the currency that institutions will measure their faculty and their research students on their capability of doing good research. And even the quality of a thesis is kind of directly proportionate to what quality of journals you have been able to publish. So you will realize that at the end of the day, it is the quality of the quality of the journal that defines how good you are in your research. And if you look into those so-called good quality journals, the top quality journals in marketing, for example, these are Journal of Marketing, Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Journal of Academy of Marketing Science, and lots of others. When you see those so-called top journals, you will see that so there's something in common. And one of the most important things that is in common is the fact that all these journals have a very high regard for the theoretical contribution that your article makes, right? So one of the very important criteria for your research to get published is whether your paper that you are trying to publish, whether it contributes to theory, whether it contributes to knowledge, and therefore your publication chances are related to theoretical contribution. And here I would like to also link the theoretical contributions to research questions by saying that if you ask interesting research question, and by interesting it means new research question, those which have not been answered or never been asked maybe, or you're asking them in a different way. Your new and fresh and interesting research question that you generate would be directly proportionate to the theoretical contributions that you make in your study or in your article or in your thesis. And therefore, I'm not saying that the research question itself is a theoretical contribution. No, they are not. But the starting point of a good theoretical contribution is a good research question, right? A set of good research questions. So if you are asking interesting research questions, then the chances are also high that you will probably end up making some addition to some new addition to theory, and that is what we call theoretical contribution. And when you make those theoretical contribution, your paper's publishability will improve. So it will be difficult for the editor also to reject if you have tried to study something which is new, which is interesting, which has never been studied, which generates knowledge. And we'll come to that, what defines knowledge and what defines newness and refreshness, etc. But at this point of time, the only thing that we are trying to say here is that your theoretical contributions increases your publishability of paper, and your theoretical contributions are also related to what kind of research questions you are asking. Okay, the third point that I want to make is about the quality of research questions, and which is also covered in what I just said, that typically any editor who is reading your article, who will in 5 minutes of reading will quickly decide whether he will just reject your paper or he will give it to the associate editor for further review. In 5 minutes, he will come to know by reading one page or by reading your abstract or even the title, he or she will come to know whether you're asking an interesting research question or you're asking something that has already been answered, right? So a good research, I mean, you may have written 20 pages in your article, but nobody reads 20 pages, to be honest. An editor is always in a hurry. Even your thesis advisory committee or thesis advisor, everybody is in a hurry and they don't read everything that you send to them. Even if it is of 2 pages, they will read only a couple of lines. So your quality of research questions is one of the very important criteria to judge whether you are embarking on a good research or you're not embarking on a good research, right? So that was my third point. And the fourth point is that, never start thinking about writing an article or never start your research study without first finalizing good research questions, right? So it's all worth all the effort in making those research questions. So the big thing is that, how should we start or where do we start, right? And so there are many ways to start, and we'll talk about that in the coming slides. But essentially, one point I wanted to make here is that there's a lot of influence of the Americanization. The forces of Americanization is what I'm trying to tell here, and I borrowed this from Mark Dejewski's paper here called Academic Labor, Journal Ranking List, and Politics of Knowledge Production in Marketing. And because I'm from marketing, so this paper is what I liked, and it's a fairly recent paper where the author talks about how the Americanization of the management research in general has come to a point where everything which is not done in the way that American knowledge production systems or the American journals want it, the way they want it, if you don't do it that way, the acceptability of that research reduces. So that is really unfortunate because Americanization or American standard has come to be synonymous with world standard, which is again not true, because there have been several traditions, research traditions like European research tradition and other research traditions, which are not from America, and they also are equally good or maybe better. So fortunately or unfortunately, we have not in India, we have not really embarked on any creation of any new research tradition so far, not that I know of. So we don't have so much of things to boast of, so as to say. But the only point I'm trying to make here is that it's an unfortunate legacy that we have today as researchers, that when we try and do good research, when we try to find outlets for those research, we end up going to top journals because that is what everybody wants you to publish. And the so-called top journals are the ones that are coming out from the US, where the entire editorial board, the editors, the associate editors, the regional editors, the entire editorial review board, the entire editorial advisory board, everybody is American or from America, right? So there is an inherent bias in the entire knowledge production system, right? That's what the author is also trying to tell you, that the entire knowledge production system, which is controlled by the journals, the so-called, especially the so-called top journals, is, the gatekeepers of those knowledge are mostly based out of America. So what they would like to see get published is something that might be relevant to them or relevant to the American audience, which may or may not be relevant to people in other parts of the world. Now that should not happen, because this is like saying that everything should gravitate towards an American knowledge production system, and the paradigms they believe in, and the assumptions that they make, the practices that they have a different priority that we have. For example, the American industry might want to see a particular kind of research. The Indian industry might want to see a different kind of research. Or the Indian society has a different set of problems. The American society has a different set of problems, right? So what we are, if we based out of India are trying to do research which is relevant for most of us in India or this part of the world, then publishing it in the US, I'm not saying it is impossible. It is possible, and many of us are doing that already. But the point is that we are kind of forced into shaping it up to meet the standards of the American knowledge production system, which is the unfortunate part. I don't have a solution for this, till we have, so-called another set of top journals that come from a different part of the world, or we have a broader set of top journals which accept more paradigmatic tolerance, so as to say, where they're tolerant towards a set of research questions that are relevant for a set of people who don't live in US, which are not American, so as to say, or they follow a system of production which is different from the American system of production. So that is what I'm trying to say, that there are no parallel systems of production of knowledge. and therefore everything gravitates to an American production system of knowledge. So therefore, there are two ways of doing it. Many of the researchers that many of us are aware of or we know of have tried to, in their quest for becoming successful or to publish a lot of papers in a short period of time, they have gravitated towards that American system, and that has led to them getting a lot of publications. So they have a lot of collaborators who are from that part of the country world, or they have followed their systems and processes and their templates, and they're plugged on, so as to say, into that system from any part of the world. So they are probably doing well in terms of publishing papers. But what you have to realize is, that there is something called publication, which we are talking about for quite some time now. But there's something else which is called impact, right? And so typically when you ask the academics about the kind of impact they're making, they have very little to boast of. So many of us will say that we have so much of H index or so much of I-10 index, or we have that this is a Google Scholar citation, or that is my that is the impact journal, the impact factor of the journals where I publish. So those are the typical, the measurement system that American system, kind of goes by. But if you look at the real world impact, it doesn't come from, how much is your Google Scholar citation, or how much is your I-10 index or H10 index or whatever. So, or what impact factor you're publishing in. What really matters, and what should really matter to most of us in at least this part of the world should be, how our research is getting disseminated to the ordinary people in any part of the world, or how our policymakers actually accepting what we are trying to do, or how much can we interface with policymakers or policy implementers, or even the managers or the management of different organizations, whether it's for-profit, non-profit, government, non-government. How are we trying to work together with those set of people so that the research that we do is easier for people to read and understand and implement and adopt, rather than publishing in journals which are read by, as the joke goes, 2.5 people. So what we are trying to say here is that there's a lot more that needs to be done to unshackle the knowledge production system. So right now it is captured by one set of systems, and it has to be unshackled. But that is not something that all of us will attempt to do that. Some may, some may not, and you don't have too much time for things to change. You still have to follow the existing system, which is still American system. So in that kind of a scenario, we'll try and see in coming slide. I'll try and show you how even within that closed clique of people who are controlling the knowledge production system, we can still try and find relevant research questions which might be relevant to people in this part of the world. So therefore, my point is back again to how do we start, right? Or how do we, or where do we look for fresh research question? Now, fresh research question, I mean, it's very difficult to actually claim that, research questions can be fresh, because you don't know, whether anybody else has thought about that. So it may or may not be as fresh, as you would like them to be. But the point is, you can always compare that to the kind of research question that is being discussed, or that is being researched in the literature already, right? And you come to know whether your research questions are different than those which everybody is talking about. So the point is, where do we start, right? And I would first talk about, where not to start. So never start from the literature, and this will look very contradictory to you, because many of us, when we started doing PhD, actually started off with the literature. So our guides and our committees will say, first you go and read about this topic, read 50 papers, read 100 papers, make a summary, put it on Excel sheet, or write a short essay, write a review paper, and then you'll come to know what is the state of the literature on this topic. And then you find research gaps, and then you formulate your research question. Now that is what I have been taught, and that is probably what many of you would also have been told. But I would say that, having done all of this and having seen all of that, somebody told me I did that, and now I realize it's a bad way to start. The reason, I mean, I'm not saying you have to believe me, but all I'm saying is that this is my opinion that this is not a good way to start, because literature is full of many things. First of all, there are good journals and not so good journals, and there are good papers and not so good papers. And then it's a mix of also different research context, right? So different researchers bring in different paradigms and different theories and different context within which the different papers are being studied. I mean, the research studies have been done and papers have been published, right? And if you're looking at a broad spectrum of these papers, there will be a lot of contradictions. Even nobody will agree to any. There will not be any convergence. There will be a lot of divergence and a lot of dichotomies and confusion and messiness in the literature, which is a natural thing to happen because everybody has something to say. This is what the research could have found out. But the main reason why I'm saying that the literature is or may not be a good way to start, a good starting point, is because the literature will always direct you towards itself. So there is a tendency that the more you read the literature, the more you may gravitate towards it, right? So there is a problem of gravitation. You may it's like saying that the more you talk to a person, you may start liking him or liking her, right? So there is a problem of gravitation, that the more you get familiar with the literature in the beginning of the journey. I'm not saying that you never read literature. So you have to read literature, but I'm saying don't search your research questions from literature. Right? That's what I'm trying to say. So when you start off your research questions, journey of finding research questions, by starting off from reading the literature, there are multiple problems. Some of them, what I told is that one, that there are so many different streams of thoughts and paradigms and theories that all of them getting mixed, there'll be no conclusion, and you'll be probably more confused than enlightened. The other problem I said is because the literature is a bad place to start, because you tend to gravitate towards it. You tend to become a fan of the literature, or you tend to follow the literature because you think that everybody is saying something or the other. Each of us keep citing the other study, and A citing B and B citing C and they're citing D. So it looks like that you have to agree to what has been done before. So there is a problem of legacy. There is a problem of legacy in the literature because there is a kind of some kind of a coercion, a tacit coercion for you to agree to what has been said before, and that itself is a very bad position to start your research from, because the whole point of doing research is to find something new. And if you're starting from a place which will force you to agree to what is already known, then this becomes a very contradictory way to start, right? So that is what I was trying to convey. So the question would be that if literature is a bad place to start, then what would be a better place to start? A better place to start would be anywhere, where you can actually look or observe or see or read or talk about any phenomena that is of interest to you, but that is going on in the world, right? So for example, if you're a business management researcher or you're a marketing literary researcher, you talk to people in the real world, you observe the phenomena, you sit with the managers, or you sit with the people who work in that context, or you can read newspapers, you can read business magazines, and try and understand what is happening. So this is a world which is practicing, right? So we are in the academic world who are kind of little cut off from the world of a so-called real world, which is busy practicing. So there's a world of practice out there, whether it is a practicing manager or practicing policymaker or practicing policy implementers or whoever. There's a world out there which is practicing without even knowing the theory. And there's a world out here where we as academics are not really practicing much. We are just reading or thinking or writing and looking at those people who are practicing. So there are two different worlds, right? The way we think and the way they do, right? So when we look at that world from this world, it will always give you, and if you suspend your judgments and if you suspend all the knowledge that you have, and that is why I'm saying don't read the literature before you start making your research question, because when you read the research literature, when you read the literature, then you are already biased by what is already known, right? So your openness towards observing something new, which might teach you something, is very little. So I would suggest that you go with an open mind, go with like a child, with an absolutely blank slate, and enter the world of practice in that area where you would like to do business. For example, if you want to work in the area of business management, then you talk to managers, or you go to an industry and see how things happen. If you are working in sales, then go on sales beat or talk to sales managers. or if you're doing research on observational research, then go and observe customers or go and observe employees or anybody that you would like to. So by doing observation, by reading newspapers, which is not research literature, by reading business magazine, which is just just a non-academic literature, or even talking to managers, talking to policymakers, talking to anybody, might be a good idea rather than talking to researchers or talking to academics, right? Because then you will have an open mind in terms of accepting what might be of relevance to you, right? And even even I found from my own little experience that even talking to friends or their spouse or spouses or relatives or anybody, a good and for example, there's a common topic that we're discussing on the dinner table or on the breakfast table, and we are talking about something like TRPs, or we're talking about something else common that's going on, and their views, when you hear, I mean, even if you think they're naive and they may not be an expert on the topic, but still when you hear some of the views, you might some the way they are articulated or they're approaching the problem in a very different way, right? So these kinds of observation and these kind of new learnings that come across when you are going with an absolutely open mind into a context which is of interest to you, where you will probably do your own research. And in that context, when you immerse yourself and you listen without even knowing anything, then you will see that you have interesting research problems coming out from there, right? So we, in a couple of slides later, we'll talk about how from observing you can find out something new that is happening, and then how you can develop that into interesting research question. Okay. So any questions so far? I mean, am I making sense, or you want to ask something at this point of time?
Sir, you're talking really very excellent. I mean, it's really clear. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, thank you. So in that case, let's move on. So we are saying that this slide was about how do you really start off your research questions journey, and we said that according to my opinion, literature may be a bad place to start because there's a lot of legacy issues, a lot of things that is already known. You get biased by that, and then you stop listening to the real world. So let me just start off by giving you an example of what it really means to be having an open mind and keep an observational eye on things that are in your research context, and how by observing that may give you an inspiration or some kind of trigger or motivation for you to go about developing a research question or a set of research questions. So I've taken an example here. I mean, I know this images might not be very clear, but I'll read out for you. So I have 3 images here from the same article. The article is called Towards a Theory of Reproduction of Social Innovations in Subsistence Marketplace. Okay, so this was an article that was recently published in a journal called Journal of Product and Innovation Management. So maybe I can put this on slideshow full screen so that you can see. So this was this article published on the left-hand side is the first page of that article. This article is titled, is authored by Laurel Steinfeld and Diana Holt. Now, why am I quoting this here is that this is an article that uses the context of subsistence marketplace, which is like bottom of pyramid that many of you know. And they study something called theory of reproduction. They're trying to propose a theory of reproduction of social innovation. So, what is innovation? So, social innovations are those innovations which are geared towards the betterment of the society. Now, what I wanted you to focus on is that how does the paper start? So, if you read the introduction, which I've given in the middle column, I'll read it for you because this is a little blurred image. So, if you start off reading the paper, this starts with the introduction, and see how they have started off with a small anecdote which they faced in their research context, and then that triggers them into entering into a broad area, a broad question, which is the like a original research question, and then how from that broader research question they are kind of bifurcating into specific research question, which is on the right hand side in the method section. Okay, so I'll read out. This is how the paper starts. The paper starts with the introduction, and it says the small water storage ponds dug in the ground litter the landscape of rural Kenya. So they're talking about rural Kenya. Kenya is a country, in Africa. So these researchers have gone there for their research context, and they see that there are small water ponds all over the ground. Then they say that some are properly functioning, bringing about myriad benefits. Rather than spending 2 to 6 hours a day collecting water, the children can spend that time attending school, or women can pursue income generating ventures. Okay, this is what UNICEF is saying. Now, water ponds improve the farmers' livelihoods and resilience to climate change, allowing them to maintain or increase their agricultural productivity. As the author's fieldwork reveals, self-owned ponds enable the families to grow kitchen gardens and thus supplement the household diets with nutritious vegetables and incomes through the sale of surplus crops. Yet, despite these benefits, many water ponds, which are typically built by the subsistence users means poor consumers, have become dried up holes in the ground, acting as deadly traps into which the livestock, which is like sheep, and the young children can fall. So now they ask a question, why is this the case? And then they say the premise of this article is to explore this query. The author considers why some innovations can be effectively reproduced by subsistence users while others cannot. Right? The central question explored is thus, and this is where they go and define their central research question. They say, what is it about the innovation and the actors and the interaction of these aspects? That means the interaction between the actors, between the people who are doing all this, and the innovation, that whatever they're inventing. The pond is what they're inventing, and the actors are the people who are digging the pond. So what is it about the innovation and the actors and the interaction of the effective reproduction of social innovation in subsistence communities? So see how beautifully they start off the paper by giving a small example, first from UNICEF or UNSTAT, and then they say that they themselves in their feedback have seen that in Kenya a lot of people have dug the holes, dug the ponds, but in some places the ponds, and they can use that for growing plant or vegetables, etc., and that will increase the income and that will improve their livelihoods and quality of life. But in other places, they say that the same ponds are not working, and they ended up as a hole where children fall or the livestock fall, and and basically it is unsuccessful. So therefore, they're saying that the concept of digging a water pond, which is not a rocket science innovation, it's a simple, basic subsistence innovation or social innovation. It works in one place but doesn't work in another place, right? So they're trying to study that how does the interaction of the actors and the innovation actually leads to effective reproduction of these innovations, right? So what kind of interaction between the people who are digging the pond and the pond itself, which is the innovation, the interaction, how and what kind of interaction between the innovation and the actors can lead to the reproduction of this innovation, right? So this is what is the primary purpose, and as you can see in the title of the paper, the scope of the paper is to propose a theory of the reproduction of social innovation in subsistence marketplace. Now, 10 pages after introduction. So the introduction is in the first page, and if you go to the page 10, you arrive at a section which is called method. In the method section, you will see how these authors have now expanded on this research question which they mentioned, the broad research question that they mentioned on the first page. Now they're expanding into two research questions, right, which is mentioned in the method section. So they say in the method section that to answer the overarching research question, the authors employed methods to explore two aspects. Number one, what attributes of social innovations affect who can reproduce the innovation and augment the need for bridging agents? And secondly, how do these attributes interact with the capacity of the subsistence introduction section on page 1 has now been kind of split up into two interrelated research questions. One talks about the attribute of the innovation, and the other talks about how the attributes interact with the capacity of the user, the innovator, right? And then they talk about how they went about doing the qualitative interviews and how did they go about collecting data or analyzing data and so on. So my whole purpose of showing you all this was that how these two researchers, I mean, and there are many like them, who are so immersed in their research context, whether it's Kenya or wherever they're working in the world of social innovation or in the world of subsistence marketplace, they are so immersed in that context in which they're doing research that interesting questions will come up through observation. Just like they observed about simple thing about water ponds, some are dried up, some are working, and it's the same water pond. I mean, and digging it is it's not the problem, right? So they're saying that the digging the water pond, if that is innovation, that is not making a difference. The difference is, how that water pond is actually working. In some places it is dried up, and in some places it is working like a water pond, and how the interaction between the user and the innovation can actually lead to the reproducibility, the repeatability of this innovation, right? And they propose a theory about that. So it's one thing that we can learn from whatever that we have seen or heard about in this paper, what they've done. And obviously, all of us have not read this paper, but what we learn about this from a little glimpse about this is that how we can actually generate a lot of interesting research questions from observation, right? So the more you know about the context, the more you learn about the context, the more you try and see deeply into the context, the more you will be able to question why the things are happening the way they are happening. Okay. Now let me take you to a more closer to life or closer to me kind of a context in which one of my PhD students who's now graduated from IIM Calcutta and now is working as a faculty. He was my PhD student, and then he was also, as we all do, he was struggling with his research question that what should I do my research on, what should be my thesis topic, what should. And then he hit upon, somewhere he saw the YouTube ad, or he saw some ads where he saw this campaign from Coke, which was called Share a Coke campaign. Right, so you can see pictures there where this is a typical example of what Coke did in Australia in 2011-12, where they started off with the Share a Coke campaign, in which they kind of promoted the idea that the friend can actually gift a Coke to his friend by getting his name tag on the Coke. So you can go to a store, he can type the name of his friends, the printed label will come, and then he can put the label on the Coke bottle and he can gift it to his friend. So like Kylie can print one for Luke and give it to Luke, and Luke can print one for Kylie and give it to Kylie. So Kylie and Luke can gift a Coke to each other, and then maybe they can consume together. So that's called sharing, right? So you're gifting and you're sharing a Coke. So this was a campaign that was run in Australia, and then became very successful, and it led to increase in sale also, and especially on the social media page, for example, on the Coke Facebook page, the traffic increased by 70%. And the consumption increased by 7%. And then this was replicated across the world in many other countries like UK, South Africa, China, Mexico. It came to India, but in a little watered down format. Now, my point of showing all this is that, that PhD candidate got very excited by what exactly the Pope was doing in this campaign. So he was very excited by this campaign. And then he said, I would like to, learn about this, what's exactly going on. Coke is, is a master in kind of marketing its brand and creating campaigns. But why are they bringing in friendship here? Right? That's what he was kind of anxious about. So then, he then started to think about it. He started to talk about it, discuss with his friends, and explore, what exactly has friendship got to do with brand, or what has friendship got to do with. Friendship means friendship with among the consumers. So how does the friendship among consumers affect their maybe their consumption experience, maybe the perceived value from the product, and so on. And one thing led to the other, and then he landed up after a lot of reading and a lot of thinking. He came up final research question that he arrived at after a couple of months was that is what you can see on the left hand side. So these are the three research questions that formed his thesis. The first research question that he, and this came from the Coke campaign that he saw. So the first research question that he made was like as following: that does the presence of a friend with a customer have any impact on the perceived value obtained from the consumption experience? Right? That means if you're having a Coke with a friend, does the presence of your friend increase the value that you get from that experience? Second research question was that how does the presence of a friend with a customer influence the perceived value from the experience? That means that if you are having a Coke with a friend, even if it is not Coke, suppose you are having some food or something with your friend, does it increase the value from that experience? And the third question was that what are some of the moderators or moderating factors in the relationship between friendship and the customer perceived value, right? So he did his thesis on this topic from 2000, I think, 13 to 19, and then as all PhD students do, he went about publishing part of his research. So that came out in terms of this conceptual paper that was published, which you're seeing on the right side. This was a conceptual review paper that was published from his initial work on the entire literature review of the relationship between friendships and in marketing. So the paper is called "The Friendships in Marketing: A Taxonomy and Future Research Direction," which got published in AMS Review. What is the role of friendships in marketing? Right, that paper itself took him 2 years to publish, but it was worth the effort. So this is where one thing led to the other, and what started off as a fascination for campaign for this Coke Share Coke campaign launched by Coke that ended up in his spending 3 years doing his thesis on how friendship is important for marketing. Right. So the entire thesis, which took him 3 years, is summarized in those three research questions, right? And as you can see that, they're all linked to the fact that how or the perceived value, right? And then the third question they're talking about moderating effect. Okay, so this is one example of how you can start off with something that excites you, something that intrigues you, something that triggers a thought in you. And everybody has a different story. Each of us are different. So I would say that as researchers, we should listen to our hearts. Listen to our hearts. What is your interest? What bothers you? What interests you? What triggers your thought? Something that is of interest to you, it will stay with you. You'll be interested and motivated to work on it. I'll give another example. So for example, one of my PhD friends in IIM Ahmedabad, when I was doing my PhD, was intrigued by some conflict that she saw in her company when she was working in the US. And when she came back, she was so bothered by that conflict that she started off, thinking about it, talking about it, discussing about it, and then she ended up doing a thesis on that, right? Similarly, another of my friends who had worked in distribution channels was affected by how distributors' relationship with salespeople, can sometimes be good, sometimes be bad, and how that relationship quality affects the impact, such as sales or other things in the market, right? So then he was so intrigued by it because he saw that in his experience, in his industry experience, that when he came to join his PhD, he remained anxious about it. He kept on reading about it. He kept on thinking about it. He talked about it. He discussed about it, and eventually he did a study. He did a research on that, and published on that also. So it's something like what we call as channel conflict, right? So therefore, something which bothers you, something that intrigues you, something that is always bothering you or troubling you or interests you or motivates you, that should be your trigger for how you can go about searching for those research questions. So there are multiple ways where you can start, but always start from a context that you understand. Okay. There are interesting research questions that can also be generated from the current situation, which is the COVID times. For last 6 months, we are almost, or 5 months, we are kind of caged or imprisoned in our house or house arrested because of COVID, the lockdown. So I recently saw this ad, from Kent RO, and in fact, this is a Kent Atta maker, where this was like a very insensitive kind of an ad, and it was also criticized in social media and other places where they talk about how you can read the ad that they talk about how we should not allow our mates to meet the dove because she might be infected with the coronavirus, right? Now they might have said this like in a lighter note, thinking that customers will relate to it and they may not mind it. But actually, they ended up getting a lot of flack for this because it is considered to be very insensitive to our housemates. They are also human beings, right? And you can see some of the comments below the pictures. For example, somebody saying, "Are you allowing your maid to knead atta dove by hand?" etc. etc. I mean, these are not comments, but yeah, you will see comments when you go to social media pages. You'll see a lot of people are actually criticizing Kent for being insensitive to maids. And then you have Hema Malini also, who's the brand ambassador for the Kent. Now, why I'm showing you all this is because COVID is also a new context, and we are living in this context, and it may not remain forever. So we might hopefully be out of this after a few months. But the behavior of the consumers, in particular, or human beings in general, have a lot of divorces happening during these days. There are a lot of other behaviors, consumption behaviors have changed. People are not buying luxury goods. People are focused on basic goods or things of basic importance and so on. And they're doing away with buying cars or going on vacation, which is impossible. So a lot of industries are in doldrums, like travel industry, the air industry or the transportation industry, the tourism industry. So certain industries are doing well, certain industries are doing bad. Consumer habits have shifted, right? Which may not last. But this different context is something that is what is common to all of us is that we live in this context. And what is more interesting is that we will hopefully not remain in this context for very long. And therefore, this is an interesting time as a or even attitudes, and what is changing, how have the consumer habits changed, will these consumer habits remain, will these change forever, or are these going to so basically saying what will stay and what will go back to normal. Some people say that some things will come back to normal when things are better. Some people say something will change forever. So these are also interesting research contexts in which we can develop some interesting research questions. And at the product angle, are you looking communication angle? For example, this is a communication, right? How should you communicate during COVID times, right? Or should you look at the product design angle, right? Or should you look at from the consumer habits angle? So there are a lot of interesting questions that can actually during COVID times, where we see a lot of changes happening all around us. Okay, so this was just another example of how we can use this opportunity while we are all under lockdown. We can use this opportunity to observe how interesting research questions can be framed from a new context called the COVID lockdown context. Okay, so from that point of view, let's go on to the fact that how do we or what should we avoid, right? When we are framing or when we are thinking of formulating research questions, what should we really avoid, and then we'll come to what should be done. So what we should really avoid, and this is my opinion, of course, is that in terms of research questions, when you are beginning a research journey, whether it's a thesis or an article, what not to do. You should never do replication study. Replication study means you are repeating. Somebody has done this before and you're just repeating the same thing. You should avoid this because it is not going to generate new knowledge. So you should always pick up research questions or formulate research questions which have never been studied. If you pick up somebody else's research question and you say, okay, that guy has done this in US, I will do this in India, so it's new. Now it is not new. So it may not be new. It might be, you may end up getting the same kind of results. More importantly, if you really have to look at how things would have been different if a similar situation happened in India, then you should see, how Indian context and that context might be different, and maybe ask a slightly different research question, where it brings in the reality of difference in the context in India, right? So, for example, don't ask the same research question and avoid replication, but you can look at similar phenomena in India and see what is different here, and can I ask this thing in a different way, right? So that can be done. So because I've seen a lot of theses and a lot of articles in not so great journals where a lot of researchers actually, especially PhD students, are just copying some other research questions already studied, already published. So they pick up research questions from published studies and they kind of they adopt that research question and they do thesis on that research question. So that I would say we should strictly avoid, because picking up a research question is like you are getting out on the first ball, right? So as to say. because it is your thesis, or it is your paper, or it is your research, right? So your research is defined by your research question, right? If you pick up somebody else's, then it's no longer yours. It will be very difficult to say what I did is new, because the backbone itself is such question. So if you are using somebody else's backbone, you cannot say that that is new. So please avoid that. And if you have to, if you're inspired by certain research question and you want to replicate it, at least understand how things are different here, and maybe you can reformulate it in a different way, because the context is different. So if you see the same phenomena in a different context, the phenomena is different. It may not be the same, right? So you can ask a similar research question, but in a different way. So that is what I mean by first and the second point. The third point I want to talk about is that you should avoid the research question which have no value for or no contribution towards generating new knowledge. So as by now I've told you that that purpose of doing research, any research, even if it is one paper or one thesis, the entire purpose of doing research is to generate or contribute new knowledge. It's something that has not been that is not known, something that is not there in literature or not there in the knowledge itself, right? Now, I can give you a very simple way of letting you know that if you see the world of knowledge, the way we look at knowledge is what is there in the literature, right? So something that is not there in literature, we normally assume that it is not in the knowledge, not in the body of knowledge, which is not true. That is a big assumption that we make, that how do I know whether it's part of the knowledge or it's not part of the knowledge? So we say, look at literature and see whether it is there or not. If it is there, then it is part of knowledge. If it is not there, it is not part of knowledge. So that is very, very incomplete way of looking at that. But yeah, that's generally accepted. But what the other way of looking at it is that what we see or call as knowledge from academic standpoint is largely residing in the journals or the books or the manuscripts or the studies which may be unpublished in working papers. But there's a world which is very different from ours, which doesn't care for research, which is the world of practice. The common person. I mean, even if they are not common, the people who are not doing research, who are not doing academic research, who are not doing any research, just practicing. The brand manager who does something with his advertisement or does something with his product, or the NGO who starts a new project, or in the government who starts a new initiative, or they change the policy or they implement the policy in a different way. There's so many things happening, right? There's so many things happening. Like, for example, some years back, the government of India, started making toilets under the Nirmal Bharat Abhiyan, and they wanted to make India ODF, open defecation free, because there was a pressure of the World Bank to reduce the open defecation to zero, and the government was trying to make new toilets in the homes where people were openly defecating. And that itself is such a rich research context, and there were so many research questions that were literally floating in the air. But how many of us, or how many of us in the academic world actually picked up those research questions? How many papers do you see which say that why did that policy fail because of certain implementation issues or behavioral issues? Was it a funding issue? Was it something else? And you don't see a lot of academic papers on a lot of these policy implementation side or policy making side. And similarly, there's so much in practice. There's so many. For example, you pick up India only. In India, there are thousands of listed companies, right? There are more than 5,000, 10,000 listed companies, and there are thousands of managers. And every day, and there are thousands and thousands of products. So every day, thousands of managers and thousands of companies are doing something or the other with their products, thousands of products. So there's so many activities going around. I'm sure there'll be few at least things and those activities on their actions and their behaviors and their decisions that can throw up interesting research questions, right? So they are doing it from their level of knowledge, and in the process of doing, there may be certain trends which are worthy of studying in our research, and looking at whether there is a knowledge that is residing in the experience of the managers, in the experience of the policymakers, in the experience of the people, the common people who are on the implementation side of the policy, whether it is Swachh Bharat Abhiyan or anything, government, non-government, or habits that the habit formation, or going and defecating in the open, or going and doing certain things the way they have been doing. Is there a knowledge there? And that we can develop into a research question, and and do a proper academic research on that, and that can be contributory to the knowledge. Okay, so what I'm saying is there is an endless opportunity for us to look around for new research questions, right? So we don't have to do research questions, do research on questions which are irrelevant from the knowledge generation point of view, because there are lakhs and lakhs of millions of questions which can be formulated based on something that is going on in the world, which can contribute to building of knowledge. Okay, and then the fourth point is that avoid those questions which are too broad or too ambitious. I mean, you can't really change the world with one research question, and even trying that will be too ambitious or foolish, in fact. So, too broad research question can never be answered. Also, avoid questions like, should we do this? Should this be done? Like this. Because any question which is of the form should or could is cannot be answered by research, right? I mean, should is something that is normative. You can't really say, I mean, should we be honest? You can't answer this question by research. So we should avoid such questions. And finally, we should avoid selecting those research questions, which are, again, going back to the literature question, that, many people say that I'm totally blank, I don't know where to start. So I will go and read this paper, and I will look into the last section which says limitations and direction for future research. And I'll pick up the question that researcher has suggested, and I'll make those research questions as a research question for my study. I would say this is a very, very bad way, a lazy way of choosing a research question, because you really don't know, that context, right? So that researcher in that country 20 years back may have studied it. That context may not be there, may not be relevant, and why do you want to pick up a second-hand research question, right? Unless you can relate to that context in the real world and say, yeah, this is something which is relevant. I see it. I know that there is a face value to it. There is it's a valid question. I see people getting bothered about it. And important point is not just freshness or newness of research question. Important point is also whether it is relevant. You pick up a research question that from a study that was published 20 years ago in Iceland. If you pick up some research question from the last section of that paper, it may not be relevant to people in India in today's world, right? So why do you want to waste everybody's time trying to study this when it doesn't make sense? So choose something that is relevant 2 years from now, if not even further, right? So context is extremely important, that you are living here, you are living today. When you start your research journey today, you will finish it in the next 2 years, maybe, or 3 years, and then publish it will be 4th year. So, do something that will stay relevant after 3 years also, after 4 years also, rather than going back in time. Because every paper that you read is a knowledge from the past, right? It may not be relevant. Things would have changed, right? Okay. So I'll take a pause here. If you have any questions, else, Tahir, we can take a break at this point of time.
Sir, just ask the participants if they want to take a break, or else you can
Sir,
continue.
excuse me.
Yes, please.
So this is Shami, a Commonwealth Scholar and graduate of London School of Economics. First of all, I'm very much grateful to the organizer, sir, that he has shown his mercy to participate me in this resourceful event, so that I can have this very knowledgeable lecture of you. Yours. Thank you very much, sir. So Honorable Singh, sir, my question to you is that a couple of minutes ago you have taught us that yes, we are allowed actually to work on some research question that has already been asked, right? Hello?
Yeah.
Hello,
can you repeat your question, Shamim? I lost your voice.
Oh, sorry, sir. Sorry, sir. Actually, I'm asking that a couple of minutes ago you have taught us that we can actually work on research question that already has been asked. Okay. Yes, on econometrics paper I have seen similar sort of things in finance paper as well. But the thing is that, sir, is it actually allowed if I am going for to publish my paper to some really good journal, some A-rated journal? Thank you very much, sir.
In fact, Shamim, I could not understand your question. If you can type it on the chat box, that would be great, Shamim. The voice was cracking actually. Can you type it on the chat box, Shamim?
Sir, unfortunately, I'm using my cell phone right now.
But in the meantime, let me see. There are questions from.
Sir, I got a query, sir.
Okay, see if you can type it. I'll read it. Yeah. Any other questions?
Sir, I got a query. Sir,
But I can see a question from Sheikh Kohar. Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, you said start from unexplored area of research question, which is not from literature.
Somebody's asking.
Sir, in case those who are in middle of their journey in their PhD, already they have doing in data collection or in final stage, how could they can able to rectify their research question to the present context? Because recently I have taken.
No, you can't do that. It's
Sir,
too late.
in case I have started my journey in 2015, this is my 2020. So our university has a scope to modify the thesis until presentation, sir. Recently, 2019, in one of the top A-rated journal, they have given the future study, which I have taken for my present context. Does it applicable to the present context, sir?
No, in fact, your question is also not very clear to me. Can you type it, if you don't mind?
Sir, excuse me.
His voice is, getting interrupted. So can you? I would request all of you if you can just type in the questions. I can read it.
Sir, I think you can now listen me. Hello.
Question that. Hello. Yes, Shamim, tell me.
Hello. Yes, sir. The question actually I'm requesting from you. Yes, I have actually find out that sort of research paper that has actually worked on some research question that has already been asked. Okay. So if I work on the similar sort of question, is that an issue to get my paper published in some A-rated journal? First question. And second question, sir, is that as we are really very much junior in the field of research, sir, how we can actually, describe our research question mathematically? What sort of books actually we need to, follow? Okay, could you please be kind to refer on that? Thank you very much, sir.
I would request all of you to please type in your question in the chat box because many of you, your voice is getting interrupted and getting broken, and I'm not able to understand. So in the interest of time, can you please type your questions rather than speaking? Just type the question in the chat box, please. In the meantime, let me just pick up the questions in the chat box. So Mir is asking if will there be research questions for a good review paper. I mean, for a review paper, the research question is not really required because you are just trying to do a review of the literature on that particular topic. But for other kind of papers, you might have to define your research question more clearly. Okay, Mir. Next is from Sheikh. He's saying this feasible to conduct research on research questions raised by authors in trending areas in different setting, even if it appeals scientifically. Yeah, you can do research on the questions that other authors are kind of raising, but all I'm saying is that do you know the context? You can understand the context by reading paper on that context, but I would say that it's better avoided because if you really don't understand the context, you can never do good research on that. I mean, that is my opinion, of course. I may be wrong. But I'll give an example. So, for example, a lot of academics sitting in some corner of the world talk about bottom of pyramid in Africa or bottom of pyramid in India, whereas they may never have even been to any bottom of pyramid place in the world ever, right? So, I mean, I'm just giving an example that if you don't understand the context, if you've never been there, if you've never spoken to the kind of people who live there, the data collection may have been done by some agency, so you've never been to that place, you never spoke to the respondents, you don't know how it looks, you don't even know how they look or how the context looks, then even if you get the paper published, it is like a second-hand kind of a knowledge, right? I mean, you're not really immersed yourself in that context, not understood the context, but you have understood it in a second-hand way because you've just read papers on that. So it's possible, but I think you will not do a good job of it. That's my opinion, of course. Okay, Shamim's question is saying, how to describe my research question mathematically? Would you please be kind to provide some reference to applied maths and applied science? See, I really am, not an expert in statistics, Shamim, nor maths. So I don't know how to describe your research question mathematically, but I'm just saying in general that when you're selecting research questions, in general, I'm saying, I don't know how it works in maths and stats, but in general, the research questions, I just shared some views on how to go about or how not to go about how not to go about developing research questions. Okay, so I don't know if this answers your question, Shamim, but all I'm saying is that where not to start or where to look and where not to look. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Then there is a question from AB saying most of the students identify or frame the research questions by observation, but then face some problem with not having enough literature. Now, I would say, AB, if you don't have enough literature, you are hitting a gold mine. You are sitting on a pile of gold. The lesser the literature, the better it is for you. But I don't know why most students think better it is. I would say the less the literature, the better it is. The reason is very simple. That if you start from observation and you then try to relate back to literature, what has been done in this context, and suppose you do a good search of the papers and you don't find many, even related papers, which means that there is a gap in the literature on that knowledge. And therefore, there's a need for developing the knowledge in that area. And therefore, you can make a big contribution by publishing in that context. If you have a lot of papers in any topic, in any domain, it shows that it will be more difficult for you to find a gap for creation of new knowledge. So I would, in fact, encourage all of you to pick up those areas where there is less and less of literature, if you have to look at it from that point of view. The less the literature, the better it is the opportunity to create your own impact and contribution, publishing more papers in that area. But I would again say that don't just look for the quantity of literature. That should not be a starting point. But AB's question was that what if I find that the literature is thin there? So if literature is less, it shows that the topic might be new or people may not be by this content, right? So there are many multiple criteria that are important for you. I mean, one is that you should be interested. Second, it should be relevant to people outside. I mean, people other than you. And if you still think that it's relevant, but there's not enough literature, then it's good because then a lot of work has not been done, right? So I would say that this is positive. Okay. So any other questions? Okay, Shamim saying a couple of books for qualitative research. Okay, Shamim, there are a lot of books on qualitative research. I think Professor Tahir, I'll send some names of the books to Professor Tahir. He can share that with you. And Dr. Tahir is saying, I've seen most students doing research that has no implication. Yeah, see, as far as doing research on a topic which has no implication, yeah, that is very important that when you are selecting your research question, just think about who will be your audience, who will get impacted, who will be the user of your knowledge. I mean, maybe some managers, maybe some, NGOs, maybe some people in the government. Just think about them. Who will be the people who will be impacted by your knowledge? Who are you developing the knowledge for, other than academics, right? So there has to be some implication. Otherwise, that comes in the concept of relevance, right? So if there are no implications of your research, then the research question has no relevance, or relevance is low. So there's no point in wasting time doing research on questions which have low relevance, less or no relevance. Okay. Then Shazad is saying, is it necessary to write down the research question explicitly in the research paper? Yes, you have to, as I showed you in the papers, that in the initial few paragraphs, you have to write down the research question, because the reviewers would like to see what is your paper all about. Right, so research questions have to come as early as possible. Maybe in the first page itself, it has to come. Nothing will be implicit, Shazad. You have to write explicitly one after the other. What is your first research question? What is your second research question? Then Shazad is saying, is it necessary to write down the research question explicitly in the research paper? Yes, you have to, as I showed you in the papers, that in the initial few paragraphs, you have to write down the research question, because the reviewers would like to see what is your paper all about. Right, so research questions have to come as early as possible. Maybe in the first page itself, it has to come. Nothing will be implicit, Shazad. You have to write explicitly one after the other. What is your first research question? What is your second research question? Okay. Yeah. So should we take a pause or should we go ahead and complete the presentation? Okay. In the meantime, the question is from Rahul. Okay. So I'll just take a question from Rahul. He's saying, on the basis of research questions, which statistical tool to be used for the analysis? Jump to statistical tool after research question. So the sequence is that first research question will come, then you will do literature review, right? And then your hypothesis and all will be formulated if you're doing that kind of a work. Or if you're doing qualitative work, then your research questions will guide your sample selection and your the methodology. If the research questions demand that you should do qualitative research, then you go for qualitative research. If it demands quantitative research, you do quantitative research. Statistical tools will come after your data is collected, not before. So the right sequence is that your research questions will come, and then maybe literature review, and then your hypothesis if you're doing deductive or positivist research or deductive reasoning research. And if you're doing qualitative research, then your research questions will lead to data collection, and then when the analysis happens, then you can. Of you are probably very fond of SPSS, but there are other tools also. SPSS can do a lot of things. So SPSS doesn't mean anything. It actually is just a statistical tool. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, you have to really understand why are you doing, why are you using which method, right? Using SPSS, you can do regression also, you can do correlation also, you can do conjoint also, you can do anything, right? So SPSS doesn't mean anything. So when you're choosing a research question, the research question will guide whether you will go for qualitative research or you can go for quantitative research. In quantitative research also, it can be multiple methods, right? It can be survey method, it can be experimental method, etc. And then that can be ANOVA, or it can be maybe SE, structural equation modeling, or it can be regression, right? So there are many methods, right? So which method will you use for data collection, right? So using that method, you collect the data and then you analyze. Then for analysis also, there are very multiple methods, right? So which method will you use for data analysis? And then comes the statistical tool. Okay, so we're going for a pause now, or a break, or are we going ahead with the rest of the presentation?
Yeah, we could take a pause, but when we are going to start again?
I think if there's little time left, then we can continue.
So we can continue? Okay. So yes. In that case, let me continue. And yeah, so I just finished with this what to avoid. Okay. So what to avoid is basically, to summarize what it means to say is that, in a nutshell, I'm saying that please don't waste your time if you are using research questions that have been already researched, or if you are trying to use research questions that will not generate new knowledge. You're wasting everybody's time if you are not really coming out with new research questions, right? Then the research is not required. If the research questions are new, then research is required. If the research questions are not new, then research is not required. And the other way of saying is that if you are not doing research for generating new knowledge, then that is not academic. It is not academic research, because the entire purpose of academic research is to generate new knowledge, theoretical knowledge. Okay, so please keep that in mind, because every year we see thousands and thousands of theses are completed by students who write something that is known for cannot be a topic of your thesis. But I've seen a lot of theses are like that. Consumer buying patterns of mobiles in Kerala. I mean, that will not generate consumer buying. I mean, this is I would say this is a total waste of everybody's time if you're doing a thesis on topics like this, because this is not at all required, because everybody knows how consumers buy what they buy, right? So when you're doing research, do it with a purpose of generating something new, a knowledge which is not known, right? Asking something which has never been asked, right? So that you contribute to something where nobody has said something before, nobody has found something, right? You are in the you are you are in a journey of investigating truth. So what is the truth behind this question? What is the truth behind this question? Even if your research questions doesn't lead to anything, still, it is worth doing it, because the other future researchers will know that when you started off on that research question journey, this is what it led to, right? So it's not about the outcome of your research journey. It is more about how did you go about doing it, and what did you find. So what you found is more important, rather than saying that it's only worthy when you found a gold. So a lot of journals will tell you that if you haven't found anything interesting or new, then we will not publish your paper. That happens, and that is unfortunate. That journals will say that if you've not found anything interesting, then we will not publish. So which is unfortunate, because research is not about necessarily finding something which is new. I'm saying you have a purpose of generating new knowledge, but there are many dead ends where you go on to that path on a research plan, with a research question, and you may hit a dead end. You may not find anything, and that is unfortunate. But those things will happen, and those things do happen in our thesis journey also, where sometimes we change our track, sometimes we change a research question. So you may change your research question as the research progresses, because you may hit a dead end and say, no, this is not leading me anywhere, or this is too complex. Can I just tweak it here? Research question can be tweaked there, or I will just simplify it or change it, which is okay, because for practical reason you may have to change your research question, because if you're there or it is leading to some common results, you may want to change it for practical purpose. But my point is that don't start off with a research question that is already known, or has been researched, or it has no usefulness for generating new knowledge. That's all we are trying to say here. So let's move on. So what would be the good practices? The good practices would be something like, and there are many good practices, but I'm just saying a couple of them. So some of them would be that, as I've already told you, that don't think about doing research unless you have a research question. And your research question should not be started off, don't start making it before you have understood the phenomenon, at least partially, right? I mean, the entire thesis and your entire research will be about understanding that phenomena, but even at least somewhat familiarity with that phenomena. I mean, any phenomena. I give an example of my PhD based friends who was bothered about why do conflicts happen between a channel member and a salesman, and how does that conflict lead to different outcomes. Now he was familiar to it because he had seen this, and then he started talking to managers who have seen such conflicts. He spoke to 20 managers across 1 or 2 years and found out what did they think about it, what were their observations, and he tried to understand it from an open mind, without even being in a hurry to make those research questions. So you should first get familiarized with that context. So if you're doing, for example, Tahir and I do some work in bottom of pyramid. So, if suppose we go and do some work in Africa, sitting here in Kashmir or in Calcutta, it would be, atrocious. So ideally, we should go there and see, for example, how do people live in Kenya, or how do people live in Tanzania? What is the context? How do they live? What do they eat? How do they think? How do they, consume? And only then, I can, through observation, maybe come out with some kind of a research questions. If you're sitting in Calcutta or sitting in Kashmir, if we try and write research questions of, why do people in Tanzania live in such and such homes, or why do they do this, or why do they do that, then that would be really, atrocious, because I don't have any idea about that research context. So first, develop an idea, develop an understanding about that research context. Topic like DOP in Africa, you can read a paper, you can get an idea, but then it's only a paper. You have never been there. You've never spoken to anybody there. You've never landed there. You've never spoken to anybody there. You've never seen anything. So it will be very second-hand. That's what I'm saying. So don't do a second-hand kind of a research. If you really want to do a good, genuine research, go there, spend some time, talk to people who have some idea, who have some experience, get a familiarity, then start your observation. Then slowly you will immerse in that context. And then from observation and discussion, and then you can start reading literature also. And slowly ideas will generate from your observation and discussions and so on. And then you can keep on fine-tuning them into research questions. And once you make some first set of research questions, you go and reflect, go and check that from literature. Are these already done? Is there anything which is different? Am I doing something different? Or will it be just a repetition? If it is a repetition, then you can read that paper which has done this before, and then you can say, oh, fine. Was it the same thing that I wanted to do, or is it slightly different? Maybe it is slightly different. Then you can say that is that context and is my context different? Should I change my research question because my research question is on a very context? Maybe I can add one more question, or I can modify my question, and maybe gradually you may come to another set of research questions which are different from your previous set of research questions. So your research question can get fine-tuned as you develop your research. As you develop an understanding about your phenomena and your context, it might get that, and therefore research is always back and forth. It's not a one-way linear path, right? That you keep on going and going and going and going. Many times we go and we hit a dead end, we come back, then we go in a different direction, then we hit a dead end, then we come back, we revise a plan, then we go, then we come back, then we revise a plan, go. So that plan is like research question. I mean, we thought this is a good question, but when we went ahead, we found something, we learned something, we changed it. Then we went ahead, then we learned something else. We thought, no, this is not the good way of asking a question. Let's go back and ask it in a different way. Let's modify this. Let's restrict the context. Let's restrict, maybe the respondents or something else. So some way or the other, we are always learning from the process, and we are iteratively changing our research question till we think that this is something that is doable, or this is something which is new. This is something that will add maybe better level of knowledge, etc. Okay, so a new or a good business practice can be a good trigger for you to think about where to look for possible interesting research questions. Like we said, COVID is everything is negative in COVID, but you can still find interesting new things that are happening. The many things that are happening for the first time. Consumer habits are changing, consumer attitudes are changing. As I said, industry is seeing a very different path altogether, and there's so much happening. So from all of that you are seeing or reading in the newspaper or listening to television, look for what are the symptoms that you're seeing, what are the data that is coming in. Does the data suggest you some interesting starting point which you can develop into research question, right? So that is what we are saying, that always your research question should be situated in a research context. And if you don't understand the context, then you will not be able to formulate your research question. So just as an example of that is, the paper that we just saw on the theory of reproducibility of social, where we talked about how the researchers themselves were going around in Kenya, and they found that there are some ponds which are empty, and children are just falling into it, or livestock is falling into it, and there are some ponds which are full of water, and people are growing whatever vegetables and making money, right? So that means that when you see that, and that may not be written in any paper, right? And there are so many things which are not written in newspaper, or which is not written in paper, because paper and everything is edited, right? So but when you observe, it is unedited, and you are the master of your observation. What you observe will never be the same as what anybody else observes. So you and I can see the same picture, but you can observe very different things than what I observe. So your observation is yours, right? And what you think and the way you perceive the picture or the phenomena can throw interesting research questions. So always familiarize yourself with the context, immerse in the context, understand the context, learn from the context, and then ask interesting research questions. These are some of the good practices that you can maybe adopt. Now, let me also suggest that there's a lot of Indianness. There's a lot of Indianness in the context of India that has, recent in one of our recent publications with some of the scholars in UK. We recently published a paper in Industrial Marketing Management, which is called "Doing Business in India: The Role of Jaan Pehchan." Now, this was interesting. There was an interesting context behind this. Now, you know what is Jaan Pehchan, right? So it's a very commonly used term in India, and we all knew about it. Now, I was intrigued by this concept of Jaan Pehchan, because there's a concept of Guangxi in China, there's a concept of Vasta in the Middle East, and there's a similar concept in other countries, but there's no such context in India, right? So we were just kind of discussing, and they said that, does anything exist which can be parallel to Guangxi, or Guangxi is to China? And then I said, there are many things like maybe Jaan Pehchan is there, or Jugaad is there, and so on. But then Jugaad is about innovation. So we kind of zeroed in onto Jaan Pehchan. And when we found the literature, there was no literature. Actually, there is no literature on Jaan Pehchan because this term doesn't exist. And then we started digging papers and papers and papers, and there was nothing on Jaan Pehchan. We found something obliquely related to that, something which is very tangential, something which is remotely related to that. So actually, we spent some 2 to 3 years developing this paper, and it got rejected in several journals because people said, no, Jaan Pehchan is just a common word. There's nothing new there. What are you asking? But we asked 2 research questions in this paper. The first one was that what are the most pertinent dimensions of Jaan Pehchan required for developing business relationships in India? And secondly is how does Jaan Pehchan influence satisfaction, long-term orientation, and business performance in India? Now, before we actually had to, really ask those questions, we had to develop this concept of Jaan Pehchan, because Jaan Pehchan was such a common word that we knew that if we did not use academic literature to develop this construct, then the journals will just throw it out. And it actually got thrown out by at least 5 journals before. There were no papers in there. So how do you relate different concepts, different theories to this concept? We have to develop this concept. We developed measure for this concept. We related that to satisfaction. We related that to long-term orientation. We related that to business performance. I was the only Indian, and then this another co-author called Zico. He is also from India. He's an Assamese, but he's based in UK. And then the first 2 authors that you see there are purely British gentlemen. So they had absolutely zero clue about what we are talking about. And they were the ones who were talking the most, but they did not understand the context. He's also Indian, but he spends more time in UK than in India. So I was the only one sitting in India trying to explain to them that this is how it works. And they had some fuzzy and romantic idea about Jaan Pehchan, which doesn't exist in the real world. So we had to really, kind of internally, we had a lot of arguments and debates about, this is not Jaan Pehchan, that is Jaan Pehchan, and this is what it is. So we brought in a lot of these elements there. And if I don't know if you can read this abstract, but you can Google for it and you can download this paper. So we've also brought in Indian terms, Hindi terms like Pehchan. We brought in the concept of Len-Den. We brought in the concept of Bharosa. The common language like Bharosa, Len-Den, and Pehchan. These were the 3 dimensions of Jaan Pehchan, right? So we have actually brought in 4 Indian terms, which are common day usage terms. We brought in with a lot of convincing and a lot of argumentation, and internally, and then we argued with the editors and the reviewers. The reviewers said, no, this is bullshit, this is nonsense, it doesn't happen this way, this is no knowledge, you're just bullshitting. And we kept on revising the paper and submitting it again and convincing, and there were 100 questions and this and that. But finally, after long battle, they decided to publish it, right? So what did we get out of all this? What we got out of all this is that it gives you it gives you some kind of satisfaction that this is something that I have not seen before in the literature, not in management literature. So we brought in something which is new, which exists. So we all know, all of us who are on this Google Meet call, we all know what is Jaan Pehchan, right? So the world out there should know what is Jaan Pehchan. The business literature should know what Jaan Pehchan is and what is the role of Jaan Pehchan in doing business in India, right? So it is now formally part of the business literature, which it was not before. They have written 2 easy papers, and they might have got published in the whole quest for So first one is not my paper, but it was a recent paper published by one of my friends, Himadri Roy Chaudhary, and there are authors there. As you can see, except for the 2 authors on this paper, which are from India, and 2 are from Australia. One of them is also Indian. But you could see that, if you read this paper, it talks about, and it's published in European Journal Marketing, which is a very good journal. They talk about karma of consumption, the role of materialism in the pursuit of life satisfaction. And the paper that you see on the right hand side was, I and one of my friends, authors, published this in 2011 in the journal called Journal of Indian Business Research, which is not a great journal, but still, we managed to publish that, which is called Karma Orientation in Boundary Spanning Employees, Sales Employees. So the whole purpose of showing all this is that these are definitely. I mean, I'm not saying there is no paper on karma. There are hundreds of papers on karma, but the karma orientation construct that we developed was new, right? And the karma of consumption that the authors are talking about in the first paper that you see there is also something, a new element. There's nothing called karma of consumption that has been studied before, or there's nothing like karma orientation in salespeople that had probably never been studied before. So something which is absolutely or very, very new, something which is very, very new, which is, something that 99% of the world at least brings to me a lot of satisfaction in coming out with something that world has not seen before, or something that is there but everybody doesn't know about. Okay. And I'll end this with a cartoon. I don't know how many of you, most of you are doing PhD, so I don't know how many of you actually follow what is called PhD comics. When I was doing my PhD from 2005 to 2010, I used to follow this PhD comics very, very closely. So I'll leave it to you. Maybe you can read it. And when you read it, I have one comment to make regarding this. I hope it is visible, right?
Yes, sir.
So PhD student is meeting his PhD advisor. As you can see, the advisor is saying your thesis must be an original piece of work, but not too original. You don't embarrass me. And then he says that it must be new and groundbreaking, yet follow the same vision and the protocols that I established decades ago. And then the student becomes very confused. And he says, when you say original, you actually mean what? And then that advisor says more of the same but different. So I would like to emphasize here on the last dialogue, which is more of the same but different. So this is what most journals will want you to do, that they would like you to be coming out with something which is more of the same, but it has to be different. But I would say that, the more you deviate from what is called the same, I mean, the literature, be a part of the literature, you have to connect your new work with the literature, but the more you are new or different, the more your work will stand apart. Okay, so that is what I just wanted to appeal, and I think I'm done, and we can now take the rest of the questions. Okay, questions?
Yeah, anybody having any questions?
So you can type in your questions in the chat box, because sometimes the internet might not be good. Thanks, Shamim. So those of you who had some questions but could not ask, you can repeat it here. Okay, none? Fine then, Tahir, then over to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for this very informative session that you had. Sir, we would like to have your association with our department in the future as well. And please do share the presentation with us so that we can disseminate it to the participants as well.
Sure, I'll just mail it to you. Yeah, I'll just mail it.
So if anybody has any questions, still we are waiting and you can ask.
Okay, I think Shamim has one more question. He's saying, any suggestion from you to find out any research gaps so that we could get good questions? I think the entire presentation was on, how do you make research questions, right? So all these things that we discussed, you can follow and you can practice, and then you'll get good research questions. Yeah, Shamim, or is your question different, which I have not understood? I think the entire presentation gives you some idea. Okay, so he's saying how to find out research gaps. Yeah. So the one process, there are two ways of doing it. One is that you start from literature and then you find that somewhere there is a gap and then you start your research there. But I would rather not do that way. I would say that you start from the area that interests you and see whether it's a gap or it has already been done. So if it has been done, if you can tweak it differently and then do it so that your research falls in that gap. Does that answer your question, Tamim? So research gaps will always be there, but then if you keep searching for gaps first, then you have to dig into the literature and waste a lot of time, which also is one way many people the literature. There's a lot more that is not done in the literature, right? And how would you know that what does not exist in literature? You will never find out what doesn't exist in literature unless you go and observe. So you go and observe and you find two things interesting, come back to literature and the knowledge exists or not. And maybe if it exists in some form, then you can modify your question to address in a different way, then it is still a gap. Okay, Pravesh is saying how to bring novelty in research if the area is matured. Yeah, the only way, that's a good question. So if the area is matured, like or distribution channels and marketing at least, so there are a lot of areas which are very matured. So there are two ways of handling it. One is that you don't do research in that area because it is matured. You do in some other area which is not matured. Marketing has moved from matured areas to new areas like sustainability and those areas. But then that is a matter of choice. That is a matter of interest. But if you still are interested in an area which is matured and you are finding it difficult to find a gap, then I would suggest that you try and find gap by connecting it to those areas which are new. Like for example, if consumer behavior is a matured area, but digital marketing is consumer behavior with digital marketing, then you will find areas which are not matured, and you will find a lot of gaps there. So you can also find gaps when you see the interface of one domain with another domain, like the interface of IT or the interface of IT with marketing. So you can ask questions which is on the overlapping area of marketing and finance, for example, or marketing and IT, for example, or marketing and HR, for example. So that way newness will come. Meir is asking for a new research project, a topic, the content of the thesis. I mean, the literature review may not be so bad, but it would be good to justify it for 5,000 words with that submission. So literature review is not measured in words. I don't know. I mean, that will depend on what your guide. But what we are saying is that I'm not trying to say that literature review, how big that should be, is also decided by which literature are we talking about. Are we talking about literature where a lot of work has been done, or where literature exists where a lot of work has not been done? So I really don't know if guide or your advisory committee will decide. But what we are saying is that if you're doing literature review on any literature, whether it is matured area, not matured area, you should do a systematic search of papers so that you cover most of the seminal work that has been done or published in that area, or even if it is not published but it is done, and you should be able to look at most of the important contributions that has been done in that area. Whether you summarize in 5,000 words or 20,000 words is another story. Depends on what is the expectation of your guide. So how to measure the impact of any scheme on its beneficiaries? Which scheme are you talking about, Shazad? So if you're talking about impact of microfinance, so how is it related to what we are talking today? So that you have to read papers on microfinance, and you can find out there are many schemes. There's something called return on investment. There's something called the socio-economic impact assessment is done. So those are very commonly established things. Yeah, so you read papers there also, you'll get answers there. But I don't think this is related to what we are talking about today. You have anything related to what we have talked about today? Any other questions? Any thoughts? Anything else? Okay, thanks a lot. Thank you for being patient. Yeah, over to you, Tahir.
Thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful talk. I hope that your association will continue with us as well as with the rest participants.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you, sir.